Good to be here today. I actually did my master's degree with Dr. Hancock, so anything I say wrong today, we'll just blame it on him. So kind of wrap things up, we got a great introduction on the pet side, what some opportunities are there, and then Dr. Hancock gave us a good introduction on feed manufacturing and opportunities using sorghum. I think we have about 10 minutes before our next speaker, so what I really want to do is just kind of hit some key focal points on feeding sorghum to pigs in the comparison to corn. So as we've learned here today, sorghum grain is an excellent source of energy. If we take this into account, our amino acids into account, as well as our digestible phosphorus, and make sure we manufacture the feed correctly, there's a lot of opportunities with feeding sorghum. The first thing I do want to point out is the comparison of corn versus sorghum. If you look at the ratio there, the net energy is at about 99%. That's going to be our most precise estimate of energy from a formulation standpoint. Metabolizable energy at 100% of sorghum compared to corn. The other thing that really stands out when we're thinking about feeding sorghum is the digestible phosphorus. So there's about 128% digestible phosphorus in sorghum when compared to corn. So this becomes really important to take into consideration. One, when you're feeding these diets, there's going to be less phosphorus that's excreted, and you can also alter your diets to not include as much monocal, which will help in your least cost formulations. So because the grain sorghum contains more digestible phosphorus than corn, you can adjust these monocal levels in your diet formulation and reduce those excretions. So this would just be an example of what those diets would look like. You can see here we have our monocal. Only with sorghum we can reduce that number when compared to our corn-fed diets. So from a nursery pig standpoint, feeding sorghum to nursery pigs compared to corn, there's been a lot of research done in this area. Dr. Hancock really led the way with that, as others at Kansas State and other universities. If you take all those studies and take an average of them, you can see that from an average daily gain standpoint, average daily feed intake, gain to feed, or feed efficiency, you're right at 99% to 100% the response of corn versus sorghum. So we mentioned earlier some of the things that may influence that, but with the low tandem sorghum within the U.S., we don't have to worry about that from a performance standpoint, and they match up nicely compared to corn. So this was a series of studies, just two picked from that list we'll briefly talk through. That response does vary some. In this nursery pig study, there was, with corn versus sorghum, there was no difference in average daily gain. There was a minor increase in feed to gain when sorghum was fed versus corn. However, this study was ran a second time, and in the second experiment, there was no difference in average daily gain and no difference in feed efficiency. So when you summarize all those studies and think about the data, there was really no difference in performance with corn versus sorghum. You know, there is that minor fluctuation in energy. Is it going to be 100% that of corn or 98% of that? So that could influence things. From finishing pig studies, if you look at the more current research and the summary of that research, so everything previously, the response is very similar, about 102% compared to corn for average daily gain, and 98% in terms of feed efficiency with sorghum versus corn. But for my master's research, I did a study with Dr. Hancock, and we actually demonstrated when you grind that sorghum from 700 to 320 microns, you're going to improve your feed efficiency. So a lower number here is better, and what we were able to determine is if you grind that sorghum based on this regression equation to roughly 513 microns versus 555, your energy content of those diets based on feed efficiency should be similar. So if you manufacture, if you grind your sorghum appropriately, you're not going to have any issues in terms of performance and achieving those target feed efficiencies. Amino acid digestibilities, just wanted to focus on those. There are improvements in the amino acid, the standard ileal digestible amino acids for sorghum, especially isoleucine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. And although we do typically formulate to meet these concentrations using soybean meal, this does provide us some opportunity to capture some of this value in our formulation. And the main thing is, although lysine is greater in corn than sorghum, I now have crystalline lysine that prices into my diet that I can use. So with these increased concentrations of your other amino acids provided by sorghum, if I have a sorghum-based diet, I can actually use more crystalline lysine, and then sorghum provides some of these other essential amino acids that we need for our formulation. So relative to lysine, there are several essential amino acids that are greater in grain sorghum than corn, and as a result, we can use proportionally more lysine and take advantage of the greater amounts of those amino acids. The next thing I want to talk about is the color of sorghum. So Dr. Aldrich did some work on the processing side with different sorghum colors. Dr. Hancock mentioned about how tannins can influence performance. And really what we've learned is that color, there's no difference in performance based on the color of your sorghum. So as long as you don't have those tannins in there and you have low tannin sorghum, there was no difference in average daily gain by feeding different colored sorghums, and there was no difference in feed conversion. So this just demonstrated that for all these sources of sorghum, similar performance compared to corn-based diets. So wrapping up, I think we're actually going to be on time. The key main points are we have better sorghum varieties. This is now allowing us to feed sorghum, and we're not giving up any of our performance in terms of feed efficiency or gain. And these, one being the low tannins and other genetics, making sure we're processing it accurately or the best, getting it down to the particle size you need to increase that energy availability to the animal. Taking into account your amino acids and taking advantage of those essential amino acids that it's providing. Like I said, if you use crystalline lysine to add that to the diet, you can adjust your formulations. And then the last thing is your phosphorus. That digestibility phosphorus, you're getting more phosphorus available to the animal in sorghum-based diets, and so making sure we're accounting for that in our formulations.